So hello, this is Tracie Powell with NABJ Digital, and this is our second session of the morning of our all day long how to make it as a freelancer workshops. Previously, you heard from an editor from Jet Magazine about what types of stories she looks for and what types of pitches she looks for that will make it in the magazine. Now we're going to talk about how to craft the perfect pitch. And I have with me today two of my most favorite people in the world, Angela Shaw and Jamila Bay. Let me tell you a little bit about them first, and then we can go from there. Angela Shaw is the editor of Economy Texas. She has written about startups from Silicon Valley to startups in Austin, Texas, and the people behind them. She reports on 20-something women defying cultural norms and IT infrastructure in a war-torn Afghanistan. She's done so much. I'm trying to get it all in as quickly as possible. One of the most important jobs I think that Angela has held is as a freelance foreign correspondent based in Dubai. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Time Magazine, Newsweek, Daily Beast, and Forbes Asia. So she's very accomplished and knows her stuff. My other bestie is Jamila Bay. Jamila is a Washington, D.C. based journalist. She hosts the weekly radio show, The Sex, Politics, and Religion Hour. That isn't just recently. She hosted the Sex, Politics, and Religion Hour. She served a decade-long stint as a producer at National Public Radio, working for shows such as Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Tell Me More, and with Michelle Martin and Talk of the Nation. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Humanist of London, Jazz Times Magazine, WebMD, The Today Show, and radio stations around the country. She currently freelances for the She's a People blog that's published by the Washington Post. So, as you can see, we have some top-notch people today. I want to first start off. I'm going to start off by asking some questions, and then I hope that others will join in. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's the first step in crafting a pitch before you even sit down to write an editor? What thoughts go through your mind? And I'll ask both of you that.
Who do you want first?
Angela, since your name starts with A.
Okay. Well, obviously you have to have the story down, but I think that, and this goes to even before you have a story, is just preparing to freelance, is to understand who you're selling the story to, because your pitch can change depending on who you're going to be writing for. So if it's a New York Times, national, international publication, they want a straight-up story. If it's a women's magazine that wants a little bit more about the woman and her struggle to, say, the woman I wrote about in Afghanistan and her struggle to be a business person, in a place like that, you play that up differently in the pitch, just like you would play that up differently in the lead or the top of the story. So I think really understanding who you're trying to sell it to is important.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I was just going to ask a quick follow-up question to Angela. How do you make sure you understand who you're selling the story to?
Well, you need to be reading, that publication a little bit anyway. Even if you've never heard of it, you start reading it before you send an editor a pitch, right? So get familiar. And typically, use your network. Ask a colleague, a friend, someone here, and what kind of stories are they looking for? Would they be interested in this? It's like reporting it out almost.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Jamila. I'm sorry to interrupt you earlier. You were about to say?
I was in wholehearted, and I still am in wholehearted agreement with Angela. Things that you cannot do enough. You cannot read the publication you're pitching to enough. That way you know the tone. There are some publications that do more snark. There are some publications that want it straightforward and they use the jargon and the lingo. There are some publications that you're not going to get past that editor if you can't speak that publication ease. So, Angela, I want to piggyback on what you said about, how to craft to a different market. So everybody has hair, right? Everybody has hair, but if you're writing a hair story for Essence, there are terms you're going to use that you might not use if you're writing a hair story for Parent Magazine. If you're writing a story about, okay, here's how I deal with my kinky, coily, natural hair, and that's a story that Essence might be interested in, or Ebony, or whatever. Keep in mind, you can sell that same story to other places, but you have to make it different enough. So if I want to write it for a parenting magazine, maybe I'd like to say, hey, here's how to do your little one's hair, even if it's not like yours. Parenting magazine doesn't really play up aspects of racial difference in families. That might be changing. I got to do better research. But if you send a pitch to Essence without talking about the beauty of natural black hair, they're not going to keep reading your pitch, at least. If you send that same pitch to Parents, they might go, oh, we're not that ethnic. If you write that same pitch for say a chemistry trade magazine, you better know which chemicals you're talking about. You better know about how to say, everyone's interested in sulfate-free shampoos, but really what are the same properties that can give a consumer a clean scalp and clean hair without using sulfates? And then you better know what those properties bring and how to get around a lab, or at least talk your way around a lab, such that that particular market's going to want to hear you. So you've got to know the story inside and out. You've got to be able to answer questions and stand up to cross-examination. Forgive me for that combative term, but I like combative terms. I like to imagine that when I pitch a story, an editor is going to give me every reason why that is not a good story, and I need to convince her or convince him otherwise. So if you don't know it in and out yourself, you are not ready to pitch it.
Wow. So what I hear you saying is, between the two of you, is don't just know the editor that you're selling to, but you got to know the consumers that the editor is trying to reach with his or her publication.
Yeah, that's how you sell them. I mean, you kind of look at it in the way that you expect PR people to understand what we do. When they send you pitches and you're like, I don't even cover any of this. Why are you sending it to me? And so you just delete. It's the same kind of thing. It's in reverse, as you are acting as a PR person for your story, and you want to get it in that publication. So you have to be strategic along those lines and say, I know this is a story for you, and here's why, and make it easy, because editors, everybody's overworked. They want it easy. They have a solid story, 2,000 words, magazine piece or whatever, and they're like, sweet, bring it in, when can you have it in? Because that's one less thing for them to worry about.
Mm-hmm. And you have to be very clear about why you and only you are the person who can pitch this story, write this story, and give it to the editor in the format they want. You mentioned in my bio that I did a 10-year sentence at NPR. A 10-year stint, not sentence. That's only in my mind. And the thing that I was trained impeccably well to do while there is, you've got to be able to pitch a story and say, here's why it should be done. But if you pitched it so well that a person of greater rank than you, the host of the show, a bigger reporter, said, oh, that's so great, I'm going to do it, thank you, give me your notes. That's part of working for a network. That's just what you got to deal with. But you also have to understand that even in this day of smaller staffs, there are outlets that will say, this is a really good story, we think we can tell it better, thank you for it, and some are offering finder's fees. That's lesser and lesser. I'm not getting into the, oh, they stole my story idea, because there is no new story idea. What you have to say is, hey, I have a connection to this person. I understand this. Here's the way that this story has been told, but here's what I want to give to your readers. Here's what I want to give to your listeners that they haven't gotten anywhere else, and I already have it in place. So you might as well get it from me because I can do it. You have to make it abundantly clear. I am the one who needs to be telling this story, particularly if you are not known to an editor, because it's a gamble to use you. But if your pitch is strong, and if in your pitch you make the argument, boy, do I say argument a lot. You have to make the argument that you are the one who has to do the story. Otherwise, you risk them saying no and finding another way to get it done.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, leverage. I worried about that. I had a story in Afghanistan. It was about their only Olympic medalist. Well, their only Olympic person. And I found out about it through a contact, and I was headed up there anyway because I was working on a different story. And I thought, this is a great story, but I thought, I'm not a sports writer. They're not going to take it from me. And I was worried that I would pitch it, and then there are people be like, oh yeah, that's great. You know, thanks for the idea. And there are, you know, there are no funder fees in newspapers as far as I know. Mm-hmm. So, but I knew another editor in that paper, and I said, hey, I've got this idea, what do you think? I mean, I'm kind of worried about, I don't have a sports background, obviously, but his endorsement, you know, made that leap, helped make that leap for me, because he said, look, and you want her to do it, she's already going out there, she's got an excellent track record, she's going to write you a good feature, which is what this is, even though it was a sports guy, and that helped, because you do worry about, you know, people kind of bigger papers, large magazines. They've got people all over, and people they've already worked with.
It's interesting. Thanks, guys. I wanted to go back to something we mentioned earlier, and then I'll piggyback to what you all just addressed about adding to the conversation, which I think is what both of you were getting at. How helpful is a writer's market guide these days? Is it still, do people still use them? Use the writer's market?
It's part of your research. I have to admit, I haven't gotten a writer's market in a little while because I just haven't. A lot of times, and this is true in 1995, this is true in 2000, 2005, and to today. By the time the writer's market is published, there is turnover so that those names may not be accurate. They may have a mandate from wherever. We're going to focus more on family life stories instead of, you know, overall family stories that, you know, are tangential. So you have to do your research anyway. Here's what the writer's market is brilliant for, and there is no better way. When you are saying who might be interested in a story, I don't want to only pitch it to the places that I've already made entreaties to before. The writer's market is a great place to get you aware of markets that you may not know about, markets that may not be in the U.S. Don't forget Canada, our neighbor to the north. They speak very good English there too, and some of their publications are happy to have somebody who is from down here in the States. It's good to know what kind of stuff they say they want, but in this modern era, if you're pitching a publication and you haven't at least gone to their website and looked up, you know, done a search for terms peculiar to your story and the market you want to pitch, so that you can look at what they've done over the past many months, you need to be making sure your research is solid. So the writer's market, it can be a good thing to get, especially if you're not accustomed to pitching. I mean, I've probably, if I sat down and thought about the hours I've taken to pitch stories, it's probably pretty substantial. And until you get to the point where you know the speech of the markets you want to be pitching, reading the writer's markets and learning the fundamentals is a necessary thing. If you're starting out, the writer's market is for you. Go to the library, sit there and read it. Go online, get a subscription so you don't have to go to the library if you don't want to go out. once you're established and once you have some clips, once you understand that it's not a rejection, it's a dance of I will convince you, and you get a little confidence and you get a little success, it's your choice. I'm not saying don't buy it. I'm saying it's your choice.
Angela, what is the writer's market? What is that?
Last time I saw one, it was a very thick book full of contacts and publications, and I hadn't thought when I went freelance in Dubai. Obviously, they don't have them in the local bookstore, so it wasn't an option. And I realized that we were now in the internet age, so I was like, oh, let me see. But I never got one. I really relied on my network, which was not. I mean, Jamila makes great points. Like, if you want to know where else can I pitch, that was a very good point when she was saying that. I was thinking, yeah, that's right, because I was kind of curious, where else can I pitch the story? And I've got even stories now that instead of just going to the 6 or so publications that I can think of, I should probably expand out and see what else is out there. But I haven't used it really extensively, and I didn't when I was overseas. I just it was a lot of it was a news environment, so I had 2 or 3 publications that I wrote a lot of this Arab Spring stuff for, and then for features, that's where that came up. So, but I hadn't used it.
Okay. I want to encourage people to type their questions on the right-hand side of the screen. Just open up your chat, and you can type questions that way. A few minutes earlier, we were talking about how you can add a unique voice to the conversation. When you pitch your stories to editors, you want to be bringing something to the table, something that their staffers can't already do, or their other stable of writers can't already bring to the table. You want to be unique in pitching. What are some of the techniques you guys use to make sure that you're adding to the conversation and not just duplicating something that's already been done or said or could be done or said by somebody else?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a relationship. So for me, being in Dubai and during all of the breaking news that was happening with the Arab Spring and everything, I was there. A lot of journalists fresh out of school were coming to the region. I'm a foreign correspondent, yay! And there were a lot of mistakes being made. I mean, a lot of the publications, and I was based in the region. I had been in the region for already 3 years at that point, I think. And I had the depth and the perspective. I knew that, for example, Pearl. They kept calling Pearl Square in Bahrain. Well, it's not a square. It's a roundabout. It's a circle. There are no squares in the Gulf because they don't have public forums like that. That's just not the way that culture is. And so literally there are no squares. The Tahrir Square is different, although it's kind of circular-ish too. In the Gulf, there aren't these kind of public spaces. There is no free speech, and so, but all of these little things would go in, and so I would say, look, not only had I had X number of years of experience in journalism, and here's my background, but I've been here. I live here. I'm not parachuting in and out. I understand people. I've local people on the ground, and I know how this place works. And for me, that was very important because a lot of the editors were like, what, you've got a veteran reporter out there, randomly? I mean, so that helped. And it's building a relationship, say that, we want to be working together. We want to be colleagues.
Jamila, do you have anything to add to that? What are some of the techniques you employ to make sure that you're adding to the conversation?
I want to go back to the point I made at first to say you have to explain to the editor why you are the person to do this story. So that entails writing what you know, looking at what is your background, looking at what you've been covering for a while. The first story I wrote for The Root, I actually pitched as just a story idea to them. I called them up and said, hey, there is the largest gathering in history of black atheists happening in Washington, D.C. Now, there may have been larger gatherings, but in terms of everybody using that word, this is the biggest one. Now, when you send somebody, here are things to not say, here are things to not ask. Nobody loses their faith. And I'm reading them the riot act about don't get this story wrong the way other people would do. And the editor I spoke with said, well, aren't you a journalist? Why don't you just write it? And I'm like, okay, I just talked myself into an assignment. okay, I'll disclose that I'm giving a speech there or whatnot. But I'm part of an in group that has its own language, that has a culture that not a lot of people understand. So bring that. Don't. I understand that hard news does require objectivity and whatnot, and I've been an opinion journalist for a while, so I have a little bit more leeway. But if you have a mother who fought through the insurance companies to get coverage of a pre-existing condition, if you have a sibling with sarcoidosis, which, you know, killed Bernie Mac, or contributed to his death, rather, you can bring that and say, look, I understand how, for example, the Affordable Care Act is addressing these primary, or addressing these issues of previous conditions and blah blah blah, and this esoteric condition that nobody knew about, despite the fact that there had been books written about it, until Bernie Mac came down with it. I have understanding of this condition. While I might not be a medical doctor, I can write it for a layperson because I have that background. So you need to be willing to put yourself out there. You need to be willing to tap into, well, what do I know that other folks might not know? Or how can I bring my life experience to the reporting I'm doing so that I can, in addition to getting good research and doing good interviews, I know some questions that a lot of reporters might not even know they need to ask.
I wonder, as an editor now, Angela, I'm not sure how many freelancers you work with, or how many pitches you get a week, but I wonder how simple it is for people just to do a simple Google search and find out what other journalists are already talking about, and then making their pitch after that. And it seems like a really simple, easy step, but a lot of people forget to do it.
I mean, just to find out what the publication or the other person is writing?
Well, other journal, like maybe a piece of news is breaking in, or a trend story is out there, and a reporter might want to pitch you on writing about it, but they fail to just do a simple Google search to see what other reporters are already, what they've already said.
Right. Well, this brings up an interesting topic because, I mean, Tracie, I know you and I have heard this, and I'm sure Jamila has as well. To be a good writer, to be a good journalist, you've got to be a good reader. I mean, you should already be, if you're following something as a freelancer and you're following an issue, and then you realize, hey, I have something to say on this, you probably should have an idea of the universe around you already, journalistically, of people, publications that are interested in this. So you're not cold Googling at that moment when there's a breaking, situation happening. It's kind of like Jamila's saying, this is who you are. Decide who you are as a writer, as a journalist. These are the main influences, the main topics I'm interested in. I've been a business journalist a lot. Maybe I want to be a food writer. So then I just start snarfing up all the food writing all around me and really become part of that universe so that I'm presenting something knowledgeable and I can have an idea of who it is that might be interested in it. You've got to do a little bit of homework beforehand, I think. You can't just, it's really tough to be something like, hey, I'm over here, New York Times, come hire me. They're like, who are you? What have you written? And you're competing with a lot of other smart people because, as our industry shrinks, more and more people are going this route, and there's some really top people out there that are freelancing. So I think that before that breaking situation, you've got to already be reading. You have to be part of that community journalistically in some form or fashion so that it makes it easier when you do go in and say, hey, I can contribute to this conversation, and here's what I can bring.
Okay. I have the chat feature on. I'm not sure if some of the participants, we have 29 participants, I thought that they would be able to use it, but I'm not seeing any questions come up on chat. This will be a learning experience for me. Next time, I'll do it differently. Instead of the chat feature, I'll use another feature. But I'll just continue with my own questions, I guess. And my next one would be the pitch letter itself. How do you suggest starting your letter? How do you, just get really basic for us? Do you introduce yourself? Do you jump immediately into selling the story? How does that work?
When I write a pitch letter, I write the way I speak. I come out and say, number one, I find out the right editor to pitch it to. If that means I got to call a publication 5, 6 times, you do that. That's what you got to do, because everybody's busy, and if you spell that name wrong, and if it's like, to whom it may concern, you've already lost. So find out specifically who is that editor, and then now's not the time, unless you know the person. Sometimes I have sent pitches, hey girl, here's a story you need to know about, but I have a relationship already. An editor I've not worked with before, or someone who comes on a referral. Dear Mr. Smith, 20,000 Americans a week have this problem. We can see that statistic, it's becoming a greater problem. John Jackson has a solution. He's in Washington, D.C., and his organization, blah, 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 has been solving this problem a lot. He's interesting, and there's an event that comes up. I want to put an asterisk by it. There's an event that comes up. When my experience has been that when I am pitching an editor for the first time, I need to give her something or him something to kind of light the fire under that backside. There's something coming up in 2 weeks. There's an anniversary you need to pay attention to, because what that does is that says, okay, I need to make a decision, or else I'm going to lose the story. Everything's a competition. Sorry, that is life. Darwin taught us that. But okay, so there's this thing. I've kind of given some. There's a problem. This is who it affects. Clearly, I know the readership because I've done my research. There's an event. Joe Jackson or whoever, John Jackson, is having this thing. His organization. So I've given the editor that. At this point is where I say, super duper publication readers would love this. You've been covering the thing, blah, blah, blah. You've been hammering home that 20,000 Americans each week have this problem. What we have here is an innovative way of helping these people. You haven't talked about it, or the last time you talked about it was in your issue 7 months back. Well, there's a development since then. And again, I've got that event coming up. Would you like a 1,200-word piece on this? I will be attending. I would love to cover this for you. And then I go into the background. I come from public radio. I did 10 years at NPR headquarters. I've written for blah, blah, blah. And if I can say, your friend editor Sue from that other place suggested that I talk to you. She says that your readership would better enjoy this story. So I wait till after they're interested. I want them to get the hook. I want them to understand that there's a little bit of a deadline here. I want them to understand that I've done the research. You haven't addressed this issue, or the last time you addressed it was then. And then at the end I say, hey, here's why I'm somebody who can do this, and if you can name drop or whatnot, I like to do that at the end. I don't like to say, dear editor Smith, your girl over at blah 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 publication told me to get with you. I just haven't had much success with that, but I don't want to not use it. I put it at the end, and I come out, saying, here's the story, here's what it is, here's why you need it, here's why I'm the one to write it. Your girl says hi. Would you like me to write it for you? And you have to follow up. This is the thing that a lot of us pitch well, but we don't hear back. Well, editors are busy. They're doing the jobs of 3 people a lot of times. I love the phone. As you can tell, I am a talker. So I always say, if 5 days have gone by, 3 to 5 days, and I haven't heard back, I resend that same email with the subject line, deadline for this event coming up, and I send a line. I hope I wasn't caught in the spam filter. I'm resending this. I will call you to just confirm receipt of the pitch. And then you do that. If you send that email saying, hey, did I get caught in the spam filter on day 5 after you sent it, day 6, you better be on the phone calling that editor to say, hey, Jamila Bay here. I just want to know if you got the pitch or not. I'm getting close to the deadline for the event, and I'd love to write it for you, but if you're not interested, no problem. I'll send it somewhere else, but I wanted to give you the right of first refusal kind of thing. Again, competition. Make them feel like they better tell you yay or nay, or you're going to take it to their competition.
So, Angela, I wonder, in the previous session, we talked about, or the editor talked about, 3 paragraphs being the standard for a pitch letter, a pitch email. 3 paragraphs, in and out. Do you agree with that? And if so, tell us how you, real specifically, concrete examples, what's in that first paragraph, what's in that second paragraph, and what's in that third paragraph?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It could even be 1 paragraph if it's a sort of a breaking story. I specifically, I mean, think about what the lead or that nut sentence is. I mean, the why we care kind of part of it. So, for example, in the UAE during the Arab Spring, there was actually protests. There were people being arrested, Emiratis, who were advocating for more free speech, and they were Islamists. They were more hardline Islamists, which is not really accepted. The Muslim Brotherhood and stuff is not allowed there. And so they were arrested. And so instead of, and what we've seen in the other countries is people, supporters of the people who have been arrested, protesting and saying let them out. They're just asking for human rights. On the contrary, in the UAE, it was people protesting for the government, saying these people should be jailed. We don't do this here, blah blah blah. And it was just turning it on its head. And so the sentence was, while much of the Arab world is embroiled in human rights protests in the UAE, they're advocating for the status quo, essentially. I mean, I put it better words than that, but and so the editor in New York went, wait, what? Why? So what does that mean? Why is that? So that's because the culture there and everything else, and so it gets, and that was probably a 1 or 2 sentence kind of hook. Now it was an editor that I'd worked with before, but it was still a new editor relationship. So I want to, again, I'm eager to make sure that he feels like I need Angela to do that story. And so, but that was a 1 paragraph. The features on, on the woman in Afghanistan, that was 2 or 3 graphs. I had a magazine writer who was a friend of a friend, who's very kind to kind of help walk me through the process. And I sent him, my first 6 graphs, like, this is my story, because I was already writing it and looking for a home for it. And he said, that's great, put that in 3 graphs, like put these ideas, and it really makes you focus in on the story and why it is that this is interesting to read.
I have a question for you, Angela. When you are pitching or whatnot, how often do you start writing the story while it remains homeless? I know that a lot of freelancers, particularly those who are starting out, like to write the whole story out, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on advising folks thus.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mostly had them kind of sold by the idea first, just because that's always a good thing. But this particular story, I actually thought I'd had it sold, and then the editor, for whatever reason, flaked out, and so then I was scrambling. And I just knew it was a good story, so then it becomes like, I gotta get it, I gotta find someone who's gonna do it, and because I'd already done all the work, I said, let me write it in case that person says yes, then I can turn it in like the next day, just sort of get it out. I've been thinking about that question because there are some features now, that I'd like to do, and I think that, especially given the fact that I have a full-time job, that I'm just gonna have to do the work on it as I do, believe in the story, just know that as a journalist and a storyteller that this is right, and I think I'll be doing a little bit more of that. Ideally we're all contributing editors at big magazines, and they just take our word for it, and we run around the world, and and they pay us anyway, which unfortunately is only the case for very few people. But I think actually I will be doing a bit more of that because I've got some, and they're features, they're not breaking news stories. that you just go, you have to get a yes or no right away because either you're covering it or you're not, and then we'll see. So maybe at the next one we could talk about how well that's going.
So talk to me a little bit more about shopping a story, and maybe first um, define that for people who may not know what I mean by shopping a story. But how do you go about doing that? How do you um, we know how you go about finding the editors, but how do you, when you have several editors who might be interested in the story, for example, how do you choose? Do you sell it and give an editor the first right to refusal, and then go to the next editor? How do you describe the process to me?
That's how I do it. I so let's talk really quickly about why you need to be very clear with editors about what you're offering. There are folks who have pitched multiple editors at once, sending the same finely crafted pitch, and they send it, let's just say for the sake of argument, to Essence, Ebony, The Root, and The Griot. And they've sent that same pitch, and it's a good one. Let's for a moment assume that 3 of these 4 editors write back instantly, yes, love it, want it, when can I have it? You are never going to write for any of those places again when those folks realize you went to their competition, you pitched the same story the same way, and now there's nothing to distinguish what you gave them from what you gave their competition. You get a bad reputation doing that, and I know the person I am. I don't know anybody who's done that who's managed to come back from it. I'm sure there's somebody. I don't know who they are. So what you need to do is let's say, okay, every year there are music festivals. Let's say Jazz Fest in New Orleans, and every year there is some ingenue who is the fiercest, flyest, next best thingiest. And so there are similar stories. And let's make her sexy chocolate and natural hair to boot. So that Ebony, Essence, The Root, The Griot would all have interest. However, what you need to do, my experience has worked best to say, okay, who do I want to write this for best? Who do I have an N with? So I might say, hey, magazine that has a festival in this city, but this is not your festival. Is she going to be at your festival? Oh, she's going to be. Hey, how about talking about her now before your festival so that there's already buzz in your publication about why people want to come and see her later. This is a hot story. Do you want it, yay or nay? Because I need to move. And editors understand that. A lot of them have been in our position where it's like, I got the story and I got to do it now. If they don't get back to you, if they don't call you in your timeline, you send a note. Thanks so much for your consideration. I've moved on. I'm gonna try and write this elsewhere. You let them know. Hey, sister, you blew it. I'm not saying that that's happened. I'm just using publications for the sake of argument only. Okay, me and my disclaimers. So then you go to the next place. Hey, there's this person. Now, if this is a family publication, if this is an Ebony publication, Ebony, for example, doesn't really focus on the gender as much. So the fact that this ingenue is a woman, you might not need to play up the, girl power, woman angle as much, but you might want to say she's married to this person, blah blah blah, strong black family thing. Ebony likes that kind of story. You might want to play up that angle when you pitch, and you say, hey, I need to know, let me know please if this is something you'd like. I understand if you've already got something, but you've done your research, so chances are they don't. So if you don't hear back, thank you, editor. I've moved on with this. I'm going to pitch it elsewhere. But you have to let them know. Pitching at the same time, an embarrassment of riches is the least of your problems if 2 editors or 3 editors want something at the same time. So you have to be methodical about it. You have to be organized about it, and you have to know where these things need to go. Now, if, for example, and I know I'm talking so much, and I'm going to give you your shot, Angela, forgive me.
It's okay.
If you are pitching to non-competing markets, pitch at the same time. Let's say this young ingenue has a medical condition that WebMD or Diabetes Today, writes about a lot. I'm sure that, I mean, if you turn this into a medical story and say, hey, this person who's living with diabetes, this person who's living with Crohn's disease is not just living, she is thriving, she's the next big thing, she's going to be at New Orleans Jazz Fest. I have an end-to interviewer. I would love to talk about how she manages her illness on the road, blah, blah, blah. Let me know if you want it. Essence ain't going to care that you're writing for Diabetes Today, that, she has a pump versus the injections, and then, she's lost some weight, so the oral medication is the regimen she's on at the time. They ain't going to want that. They're going to want to know, how do you keep your band together and your spiritual practice or whatever. So if they're completely non-competing markets, and if you're pitching somewhere overseas, if you speak a different language, if you are bilingual and happen to be in Dubai and Shakira is doing a concert somewhere, and you can pitch that to Spanish language media and Arab media and American media, you could probably get away with doing the same story in different languages. But you need to understand your reputation precedes itself, and if you are known for giving the same story to like markets, you ain't going to have a career for very long.
Angela, you mentioned kill fees a little earlier. I think you did. Is that something that you should negotiate up front, or if the story is killed, is that the time to talk about it?
I think they're, I mean, I think they're pretty standard. I never really thought of them as being particularly negotiable, although I guess if you are embarking on a sort of a lengthy feature piece, it's going to take a lot of your time, to where from the beginning, like, look, it's going to take me 3 months of time to do, and no other clients, I can't work on any other clients, that I think you could negotiate. I've certainly done more of that with more business clients, for writing white papers or moonlighting, because they want to get you for a month, and I say, well, my month's time is worth this, and it's got to be guaranteed or X, because it's a longer, they're buying your time at that point. But I don't know. I mean, I hadn't really explored that as a negotiating tactic with publications very much.
The previous editor said it's typically about 25%, and I know that when you sign a contract, if you have a contract with a publication, it's usually spelled out, but I'm not sure if that's still standard these days, with things changing so much. Jamila mentioned when she's editor shopped, a publication shop, pitching the story, and then the editor giving the editor an opportunity to say yes or no before she goes to somebody else. What happens if she sells the story, it doesn't work out, she gets a kill fee, and at that point she takes it to another editor? Do you risk the same kind of problems that she mentioned earlier of being marked?
I wouldn't think so, but I haven't been in that situation where that becomes an issue. I mean, I think if they buy it and then decide not to use it, they pay you for the bit of time that you spent, and then I would think that you're okay pitching it out again. But I don't really know.
Even if it's a direct competitor, you should be fine.
Well, they had the option and they didn't take it, right? So they killed it. I don't see how they could object at that point. I don't know if Jamila has experience with that.
Actually, I have not had experience like that. My feeling though is it depends on where I would be in the process. If I have written the story and I've submitted it, and the editor says, okay, we're not going to run this kill fee, I'm not going to send that same story somewhere else. I personally cannot abide by having the same story the same way, uh, a different. I would hack to my notes and maybe I'd use some interview aspect. Now, I've never been in that position, so I might feel differently if somebody says, we're never going to run it, we don't care, kill fee, and see what happens.
Okay. Okay. So, you also talked about following up after the pitch when you haven't heard from an editor. But what about follow-up stories? Whether you're writing the follow-up stories for the same editor or not, how do you go about pursuing that?
Mm, Sometimes you can easily say, well, for example, uh, some stories lend themselves to their own follow-up. If I'm covering a hearing about the potential FDA approval of a drug, well, once that drug gets approved, there's another story. Or once it doesn't get approved, there's another story. Um, we know that senior people are not here as long as other people, so sometimes you know, for whatever reason, okay, well, this 85-year-old painter, we might have to wind up doing a remembrance of him sometime. I've got a whole bunch of people who were at this event and talked about him. Can you think of me if ever you want to remember him for some reason? That's something that will that's something that I think we need to be thinking of when we send out those initial pitches. What is the next story, and can I be the one to write it?
How do you handle when you get bigfooted? And we mentioned that earlier, when you pitch a story and then the editor likes the idea, but they get one of their staffers to write it. That's actually happened to me before, where I got bigfooted. They liked that, but they paid me a finder's fee, so I was a little okay with it. But how do you guys handle that?
I only had that once. It came up because I was, and it wasn't so much about, it was partly that and partly because I was living in the UAE and writing about this stuff, and it got to the point where, am I putting myself in some kind of danger of being arrested myself? And so I pitched a story to the editor, and the editor said, yeah, that's great, but maybe, are you sure you're going to be okay writing it? And I said, well, I think so. I mean, you never know until it's out there. But and he said, well, maybe we should handle it up here. And I said, well, how would that? I forget the term he used essentially. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you can give me your notes, and someone will write it here. And I was like, no. And I was able to say, no, I'll write it because I wanted to make that decision. So it wasn't quite what you're talking about, but that was the closest where the editor said, well, we can handle it. One of the correspondents in New York can handle it. And I said, no, I'll write it. And it turned out I was okay, although it was definitely a question to be asked. So it was partly out of concern for me, I suppose, but it was something like that. And that's reminded me that this can happen. And you've got very seasoned, in this case it was New York Times, very, very seasoned people who can come into the region and do stuff. And it was like, no, let me do it. I don't know how I'd feel I think I'd be pretty upset, to be honest, because especially if I'm cultivating the idea, literally prowling around the backwoods of the UAE and my local sourcing, and then they say, well, yeah, we'll fly someone in to do that. I think I would not be happy.
Yeah. I think this was when I was younger, and I was stringing for Newsweek, and they sent one of their staffers down from New York to Texas, and we covered the story together. But yeah, that person was the lead writer. But then they did pay me a finder's fee, and I think at that time we were still getting paid by the hour. Freelancers were able to do that, and I made some money that way. But yeah, that I wonder, Jamila, has that ever happened to you, and how did you deal with it?
Well, that was my entire, I mean, when I was an editor or producer at NPR, that's just what you do. You go find stories, you cultivate folks to talk to, and then you say, here's my baby, please raise it well, to people who have names that you recognize. Um, doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, doesn't mean it's not maddening, especially when, I will tell a very quick story. I had gotten wind that there was this church in Norfolk, Virginia, where the pastor would get divine revelation of which family needed to be delivered from their debt. And I heard that story, and I pitched it, and nobody cared. This is at NPR. I pitched that story. It's like, okay, whatever. I believe it was the New York Times that sent somebody to go and go and talk to the pastor about how he delivered somebody from debt, and he'd take up a collection, and then he'd have somebody a family bring all their bills, and he'd get rid of all of their debt. And the line in that story was, you cannot serve your master and your MasterCard. And I went back and said,
I think, did we lose her?
She's been kind of going in and out.
Okay. Well, when she comes, I do have. I want to. We only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to make sure I did ask um this question, and it just left my mind. Oh gosh. Well, I think, what was it about?
Uh,
Um,
I'm not sure.
I don't remember it now,
We'll
but
cover it in the next session.
yeah, maybe I'll have to cover it. The next section is Freelance 101, and we'll talk about some of the basics, like how do you figure out how you charge, how you tax yourself. You will learn that you get taxed at a higher rate than typical people, than average people. You get double tax, actually, if you're a freelancer. Um, and we'll also talk about negotiations. So, and I'll be moderating that too, and make sure I have the Q&A button pushed on that. Um, I do appreciate you coming by, Angela, and I appreciate Jamila too. I hate that
She's frozen.
yeah, she's frozen right now. Um, so I guess in just your parting shot in terms of being a freelancer, or how to pitch a story, basically. Once you come up with that idea, you sell it to an editor. Maybe we can end by telling people how quickly they need to turn it around, and the importance of sticking to their deadline. Um,
Oh yeah, I mean all of that is even more important than it was when you're a staffer. I mean, it just goes to reliability. They can count. We want them to know that I can count on you. When I get that story, you're going to file it, and it's going to be perfect. I'm going to have to deal very little with it. It's going to be publication ready. I mean, you want to go above and beyond. Even when you were a staffer, because you're in the staff, you're like, oh, I got a few typos. It's haha, whatever. When you are working for yourself, you are your brand, what you deliver. And I have editors who I'd say, look, it's breaking. I'll turn it into at the end of the day, and they were like, yes. Even though Wednesday was a hard deadline for this particular publication, they was like, that's fine, because they knew when they got it, it was going to be basically good to go. And that's what you want to develop with them. So it's tougher in some ways, because you got to be you've got to be at your best all the time.
so are you your own editor, or do you have other editors who read before you send it to the publication?
You mean freelancing?
Yeah, do you have friends who are editors who will read over your piece before you send it to the publication, or do you act as your own editor?
I usually, especially if it's a newsy kind of thing, I usually just do it myself. I mean, you got to be really, write it and then do whatever. I print things out because I feel like I can really catch stuff when I'm looking at a hard copy. But yeah, you've got to do your own editing. And then if I've got a bigger feature that has more time, I'll have friends that I know with fresh eyes to take a look at it and stuff.
I think Jamila is back. I think. Jamila, are you there?
I'm back. Forgive me.
That's okay.
Apologies.
Well,
My
that's okay.
apologies.
Angela was just ending on the note of how you need to be your own editor and make sure that your piece is publication ready when you send it in, as it's even more important as a
And the other
freelancer.
thing too, just really even something small like look at their style, look at the way they do their style. Because the last thing the editor wants to do is have to change percentage to the symbol versus percent out. That will make them crazy. And if you can do that for them, if you paid that much attention to their style, I mean, they'll notice because I know Time Magazine has a different style than AP, New York Times a different style, and every time I would think, okay, which publication am I writing for? And do they do a percentage symbol, or do they do it? All these things, numbers, all the style stuff. They will notice, and it's little things like that that actually, they earn you points with the editors.
Okay. So, Jamila, do you have any parting advice before we end today?
It's a numbers game. Pitch early, pitch often, pitch, pitch, pitch. Just do good pitches, and if a lot of pitching for you is, one every other week, one a month, make it your best and get it out there, and get over any fear about, oh, I don't want to bother the editor with a phone call. No, get rid of that. Just do it.
Be bold.
Be
Yeah.
bold. Yes, be bold.
Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Angela Shaw with Economy Texas and Jamila Bay, with She the People on Washington Post. Thank you so much. Coming up next, we have Freelance 101. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about all the burning questions that you have right now. How you negotiate the pay for your story, how you talk about kill fees. We're going to talk about taxes because that's very, very important that you know that you'll be hit twice by the U.S. government. We're going to talk about collections from publications. I know that's an important topic right now. Thank you for hanging in there with us, and we will talk with you all in just a few minutes. I just need a few minutes to regroup and start the next chat. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.